Hey Villa fam, welcome back to season 3 of Honest Conversations with Two Village Girls. I'm Serena.
And I'm Angela.
This season, we are focusing on all of the common questions we've been asked about specific child behaviors. This week, we are answering the question, why does my child fixate on specific things? So, for those of you who don't know what fixations are, this is going to be a very psych-heavy episode because of just like defining fixations and how they work, and especially like the early stages of child development.
Mm-hmm.
But Angie, you can go ahead and kick us off.
Okay, so I'm going to just first tell you guys a little bit about what fixations are. And fixations occur when an issue or conflict in the psychosexual stage remains unresolved, leaving the individual focused on this stage and unable to move on to the next stage. So first we're going to start by, just listing a few different fixations that we have seen or, that we have heard about. So to start, I'm going to name three like binkies, pacifiers, bottles, nipples to the bottles, cleanliness and or messiness.
Mm-hmm. We typically see those fixations in a school setting. You see them at home, but we also see them at a school setting.
Yeah.
And it basically depends on where your child is developmentally and how they've been transitioning from one stage to the next. We're going to get into the different stages of psychosexual development in a second. But an example that we notice a lot of is just fascination with like things being in their mouths after a certain age. Typically, this isn't acceptable behavior anymore, especially if your kid is older, like 4, and still putting things in their mouths. Mostly because at a certain point in schools and probably in the household, there's things that the kids can find and put in their mouth and possibly choke.
Mm-hmm.
So by those like older toddler ages, getting into school age, if your kid is still putting things in their mouths, these are cause for concern, at least from the school perspective.
Yeah.
And possibly at home, because I'm sure you don't want your kids still teething and chewing on things and sucking on things at 4 and 5 years old.
Right.
So let's jump right into Sigmund Freud and his theory of psychosexual development, because fixations is one thing Sigmund Freud did a lot of like research on to try and figure out like how children develop based on how they learn. So there are 5 stages total, but we're only going to focus on the first 3 just because of the age range we typically work with. According to Freud, the first stage is the oral stage, which is putting things in their mouths. And we see a lot of that because typically children, that's how children learn. They start with if you're breastfeeding, they start with the nipple. If they're bottle fed, they use the bottled nipples.
Yeah.
They use pacifiers typically. And even up until that first year, this is that zone that they're focused on, because that's how they get all their nutrients. That's what their comfort zone is.
Yeah.
After, according to Freud, after the age of 1, we typically see an end to this oral fixation, just because they're able to do a lot more. They're at age 1, they're probably crawling, walking. They're able to explore more with their hands instead of just their mouths. So the way this can cause a fixation orally is if by the age of 1 your child isn't starting to wean off of like bottle feeding and breastfeeding. So they might continue on with like these oral things and putting everything in their mouth to explore and to learn, just because that's what they're most comfortable with at this point, if they're still bottle and breastfeeding. So we might see those like fascinations with everything has to go in my mouth.
Absolutely. So Freud's next stage is the anal stage, and the age range for this stage is typically 1 to 3 years old. And the focus of this stage is basically the control, basically kids learning how to control their bladder and their bowel movements. So basically, the conflict that arises from this stage is basically toilet training, potty training, basically.
Absolutely.
Freud believed that having positive experience during this toilet training process serves as a basis for kids to become more competent, become more productive, and creative adults. What he means by this is basically parents or providers who work with kids should offer support and encouragement during this process. So during the potty training process, as they use the bathroom, encourage them, give them praise, reward them, so that they are able to feel accomplished, basically, and they can
Absolutely.
be able to get the independence that they need for adulting.
Absolutely. Typically, if this goes well, you'll see more cleanliness from your child, more organization from that child,
Mm-hmm.
and just a more positive development because they've learned and you've praised and they've seen like positive reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of this is if they get shamed or punished for having like accidents and stuff, they feel less control
Yeah.
and they'll like more messy and wasteful, which can be like that fixation on like playing in like dirtier things. Whereas our kid that's clean might not like to play in like slime and squishy things, pumpkins. We see those different patterns based on these stages and where they are developmentally. The final stage we'll be talking about is the phallic stage, which is about age 3 to 6. And this stage is where your children have explored or begin to understand their genitals. And we see a lot of fixations on this stage because this is where they begin to understand the difference between a male and a female. And
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a sexual thing. This is actually a stage where they just begin to understand, hey, I have one thing and this person has a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they just begin to develop a sense of self and sense of privacy and security during this age. This is after they finish potty training. Typically, we see a lot less fixation around this age, depending on where they are developmentally from the first two stages of development. But typically, if we do see fixations, it's just kind of fixations on the self and there's like their security. They want to protect themselves. They want to try and avoid having their like bubble breached by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
This is typically where they have most connection to their moms or their dads because they see these body parts and they understand that these people have these body parts and they want to understand that. And so they might just have a closer bond with their maternal and paternal figures as they continue to grow and understand. That's where a child is most clingy to you because they're trying to understand and be like mom and be like dad.
Yeah.
So these are the 3 stages that Freud talks about when it comes to fixations. The biggest part of the fixation process is the id, and that's the impulse and unconscious part of the psyche where your body responds to basic urges, needs, and desires. That's where that fixation process comes in because that's the part of your mental that's attracted to or desiring something. That's why we call it that impulse control for the id.
So Freud came up with the 3 personality theories. So it's the id, ego, superego. We already talked about the id. We aren't going to go in much detail about ego and the superego. So if you guys would like a full episode where we go into detail about all of those things, please let us know in the comments, and we will do that for you guys.
The most important thing you can do is have patience with your child because it's at these younger ages.
Yeah.
That's the importance of the development process and reminding yourself that your child is not developing too slow or too fast. Just letting your child go at the pace they need to go.
Absolutely. It's very important to have patience during this process and not your child go through these different stages as they go through them. So yeah, thanks for tuning in again to another episode with Two Village Girls. Please subscribe to our channel if you are new. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them down below. Also, go ahead and hit that bell to get notified when new videos drop. Please follow us on all our social medias, which will be listed in the description box below. And as always, we want to send you out with some positive vibes to get you through the rest of your week. This week's inspirational quote is by an unknown author who says, "A characteristic of the normal child is he doesn't act that way very often." Bye, Villa fam.
See you next week. Bye.